So that hasn't happened for a while. Since when? When's the last time that happened? 1977. There you go. Yeah. Who was the prime minister at the time when he delivered that last throne speech?
1977. Who would that be? Is it our friend?
I was going to say Mulrooney.
Trudeau.
Was it?
I don't know. I'm wondering. Yeah, it was. It was Trudeau.
There you go. You just have to ask your friend, and your friend tells you right away.
Yeah. And then the time before that was in the 50s, I think, and that was also the Queen. So
what are you expecting to hear from the King today?
There'll be lots of platitudes. He likes to sort of press the flesh, Charlie. So there'll be pictures and videos of him with, like, you know, kids and stuff, people waving the Union Jack probably, or something like that, if that still happens. I mean, it did last time. So yeah, people will have the Union Jack, and he'll go up with some nice kids, as he always does, and shake hands and things. I think something that might interest people and surprise people is that he will speak French, because he speaks French and German. So that'll be kind of interesting, I suppose. You don't often get to hear him speak French or any other language, really. He usually speaks English almost exclusively. So that will be interesting. There'll be the usual, like, symbolism. It's so pathetic, but it's a real phenomenon, so we have to talk about it. He'll have some sort of medal on, or some sort of, like, patch or an umbrella or some stupid little prop, which will reflect his feelings. You know, the Queen used to do that as well. And then people will kind of analyze the HD photographs and be like, oh yeah, I know what that is. And that means, and somehow it'll translate to being a rebuke to Trump. As you know, you can usually predict what it'll be. But so yeah, we'll see that. But he's not really doing anything particularly interesting in Ottawa. He's gone to Lansdowne Park. And he's gone where is he? He's gone somewhere else that's not that interesting, really. He's not doing anything sort of unusual or particularly interesting. There's not going to be any, like, interesting sights. I think it's all going to be about tomorrow when he does the speech from the throne.
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of talk out there that he's really here to stress sovereignty. And then Yves Blanchette, the leader of the Bloc, definitely put out a post saying, like, here you have somebody coming to stress sovereignty, and you're actually paying allegiance to the King at the same time.
Well, that is the basis of Canada, isn't it? Obviously, Blanchette will know that. He's not a moron. He knows the history of Canada, but because he's an ethno-narcissist of the Quebec variety, he has his own history that he sort of has allegiance to. And, you know, he thinks more about France and the criminal code of France and all those sorts of things. That's what he pledges allegiance to, because, you know, that's what he is. He's obsessed with that idea of New France, which hasn't existed for nearly 300 years, 250 years or something like that. So, you know, he's got his own, like, clownish obsessions that he likes to try and thrust on other people. But the reality is that Canada is based on the crown. Absolutely everything in Canada. It is the absolute foundation stone of this country, and it's almost in many ways like the point of this country. It's why this country exists. It's why it is a country. It all goes back to the crown. And I think Carney, or advisors that Carney has, were wise enough to see that, and that's obviously why he's here. But obviously, there's a lot of malcontents in Canada, like the Bloc Québécois and many others groups that don't like Canada particularly, and they will obviously take the opportunity to attack the crown and therefore Canada. But most people, I think, I would say most people are probably, like, apathetic about the crown, if anything. But I don't think most people are, like, actively angry about it or hate the crown or anything like that. But at the same time, I don't think that really the majority of Canadians feel particular loyalty to the King either. But that's the reality. On a constitutional basis, a historical basis, that's Canada in a nutshell, is the crown. So it's a hard thing to get around in terms of the Constitution. Like, the King, in many ways, is like Canada's Constitution, like the way that the Americans idolize their Constitution. But Canada doesn't idolize its king. So there you go.
One of the most popular royals, now deceased, Princess Diana, was definitely one of the more popular royals. But he did bring his second wife here, Queen Camilla, is coming with him.
Yeah. She was around during Diana's time as well, controversially, sharing a bed with His Majesty. But yeah, she's not very popular anywhere, really. And I mean, there's a kind of ironic sense that, like, oh yeah, because she always looks a little bit sort of miserable, and that's quite funny. But yeah, I don't know. that is a weird one. But I mean, when you were saying popular royals, I thought you were going to mention Diana's son, William, who will be the king in a few years' time, I would imagine. Because Charles has a cancer, which, you know, they're very good at masking the truth about the health of the royals. I think his health is a lot worse than they've let on. So I think he'll depart this earth in the next few years, and then William will be king. And he is very popular for whatever reason. I don't quite understand that. He doesn't seem to have a personality, as far as I'm aware, but he's popular.
And then there's the other two, Harry and Meghan. You know, they make their own TV reality show. But anyway, we shouldn't spend too much time with the royals. But there you go.
Well, we're very strong royalists, aren't we? We're big fans of the House of Windsor, you and me.
There you go. The Liberal Party had this chance again to adopt that Reform Act, which allows MPs to oust the party leader. And again, they voted no.
Just surreal, isn't it?
Yeah, just
absolutely
no.
surreal.
We're not doing that. Come on.
And the big question, obviously the Liberals do things like this behind closed doors, and it's all secret and, you know, very much like almost like the royal family, where it's all hidden behind velvet robes. So we don't know what really happened. But the big question, as far as I'm concerned, is, did Carney and Carney's foot soldiers go around the caucus there and tell them to vote against this? Yeah. That's the interesting. In many ways, that's the only interesting thing. Was this something that the MPs actually thought about and chose to vote with principles, vote with their sort of heart on? Or were they told to do it? I think it's the latter.
Yeah, because it seems odd. It seems like a common sense thing. You say yes. Like because the collection of MPs is the real power, not the individual. But it seems like they don't want to take power, or that individual does not want any power to be able to be stripped away from him.
Yeah, just like a monarch, which we just discussed. So Mark Carney is almost, I mean, the Liberal Party is a monarchy, basically, isn't it? It's an elected monarchy. And it's kind of, it's so out of, you know, it's so contrary to our times that they don't have any democratic oversight whatsoever, really, in the Liberal Party. It's just like this, I mean, at best, it's an oligarchy, isn't it? But it's almost like an oligarchy, and then they choose a little king oligarch to lead. But that they don't have a democratic sort of tool in place to get rid of an unpopular leader, it's so difficult to wrap your head around, isn't it? And 2025, as people in the Liberal Party usually like to say, current year. But that's kind of that's in my experience so far of having sort of covered the Liberal Party. That's the Liberal Party in a nutshell, really. It's just this like ball of contradictions and hypocrisies, if you're being less generous, where they're the party of like the left and they're the party of liberalism and all the rest of it, but inside the party it's nothing like that whatsoever. It's like I said, it's more like the House of Windsor in there.
Yeah. Pierre Poilievre said he's willing to work with the Liberals to end the trade war with the United States, but insists he's going to push the Liberals for a spring budget. I mean, I don't understand why they don't have a spring budget, because Mark Carney bragged time and time again how, you know, he has a plan. So where's the plan? And, you know,
but again, what I just said about the Liberals and their contradictions, can you imagine if Poilievre had won this election and he said, no, I'm not going to do a spring budget? Can you imagine the reaction from the Liberal Party? They would open the gates of hell, wouldn't they? Yeah. They'd be so angry about it.
And the media would be losing its minds.
The public relations department of the Liberal Party, also known as the CBC and
right.
CTV,
Yeah.
they would be furious. Of course they would, naturally.
Yeah. And then the Liberals proposed a suite of crime measures.
This is a funny. This is a Canadian press story, but it's a funny little one because they went and interviewed, as usual, as Canadian press does. I assume that they're taught that when they, when they're trained, when they join CP. It's like, oh, you're going to write a story about something, call up 5 professors, and that's it. You don't need anything else. Just ask some associate professor at the university of somewhere you've never heard of. There you go. Now you got a news story. But they asked. One of the professors they asked came out and just said, basically, that the Liberals are just complete liars and they're just doing this to stay in power. And he compared it to Bill Clinton, who, I don't know if you can remember, but he had a sort of mad phase, didn't he, where he went tough on crime and he executed, or he allowed the execution of some criminals, didn't he? And he was all of a sudden, Bill Clinton was this tough guy on crime. And this professor compared it to that and said that the Liberals really don't believe this. They're just doing it because it's a question of survival, political survival.
Yeah. Landowners find it shocking that the Crown can explore their land for minerals. I mean, I knew that you don't own the mineral rights on any property in Canada. Basically, what's on the ground belongs to the Crown, or if they've sold those rights to somebody else. But if you have a house, so in Nova Scotia, there's a lot of people unhappy after the province selected their land for possible uranium exploration. They're discovering that the mineral rights belong to the Crown.
Yeah, I mean, they have it in a lot of. It's not unique to Canada or anything like that, is it? I mean, they have that situation even in the US. What do they call it in eminent domain or something? I think is the US one, isn't it? Where they can just take your land.
You don't really own the land here in Canada either. You have freehold title to it, but the government can expropriate that land at any point in time too.
Yeah, but it's just quite an interesting one, isn't it? Because that's not something that most people think about. That if you've got a little farm or something like that. In theory, the government could come and just basically start exploring it, and if they need to, kind of requisition it. But I feel sorry for the main guy in this story. It's a CBC story. He said that recently, they a wind turbine, a wind farm was built near his house, and now they're going to potentially dig up his land to look for uranium. It's he's really been on the wrong end of the energy revolution. God bless him.
Uranium is quite prominent here in Canada in many different areas, including here in the Okanagan, in the boundary country as well. But Saskatchewan obviously has mineable reserves that are proven out. So it takes a while to get, proven and probable reserves in that, so that you can actually develop a mine.
Yeah, it's a funny one because you would think if you were in the business of uranium extraction in Canada, you would just go to Saskatchewan, wouldn't you? I don't think if Saskatchewan is having a shortage of uranium. It's got a massive amount of it, hasn't it?
My advice to this guy in Nova Scotia was it's going to take forever. So I wouldn't be too excited about it, right? So even if they do plunder around on your property, but they could decide one day they want to put a 4-lane highway through your property, although Canada doesn't have a 4-lane highway all the way through Canada. So, the likelihood of that happening is probably minimal as well.
Yeah, more likely would be that they need it for solar power or something, and they're going to build a massive, multi-story solar panel empire.
That might happen. And then the bigger story that seems like RFK involved in they got a big name there involved in the ostrich farm there where they're trying to save those birds from being culled.
Yeah, he's asked for teamwork, hasn't he? He's asked to assemble a kind of team with US and Canadian experts or whatever, so that they can figure out what's going on, as Donald Trump might say. But Kennedy seems to think that it would help in the future to try and find out about bird flu immunity or something, isn't it? I think that's the actual rationale.
Yeah, I mean that group has been very, very vocal and garnering the attention of RFK Jr. obviously is a big name to get added to this list of people trying to prevent the culling of these birds. I mean, we get, like a news release from this group almost every day.
The owner, I think it's the owner or somebody that knows the owner, is saying that one of them got shot as well. One of them said that it had an entry wound and an exit wound, and it had died. I mean, I don't know what that's about, but why on earth somebody's chosen to shoot one of them?
You never know. Somebody's decided to cull it itself, cull them themselves.
It's a weird, it's a funny story, isn't it, for people to get so agitated about, but it certainly is true that people are really, a small group of people are really, really wound up about this, aren't they?
No. The next 2 years, Canada's chief bank inspector says, could be very, very challenging, right? As millions of low-cost mortgages come up for renewal. You and I have talked about this many, many times. There's a whole bunch of mortgages about to reset at much higher rates, and many Canadians are only a couple $100 away from being able to meet their monthly obligations.
I mean, the thing is, you don't want to be in charge of this country, do you? Or in charge of anything, particularly in Canada, if this happens. If there is like a massive, set of defaults or whatever, you don't want to have to deal with that, do you? And I have no idea I don't know what would happen there. I don't think they would just let it happen, would they?
Yeah, 56% or 3.3 million mortgages are set to renew by the end of 2026. And of those, approximately 61% or 22 million have yet to experience increased payments. And that's the big thing, right? Unless those interest rates come down dramatically, which I don't think they're going to come down. And here's the biggest rub of it all. During the COVID and just after COVID, in that era, the Bank of Canada governor, Tiff Macklem, said to Canadians, as home prices were just blowing up, they were just at all-time highs, to rest assured and go out and get that mortgage, because the Bank of Canada will not be raising rates into the foreseeable future. And then, in dramatic fashion, unprecedented, a 19-fold increase from the Bank of Canada rate of 0.25 to 5%. 19-fold. A lot of the people that were in variable mortgages, tough to weather. But there's many, many Canadians that took a mortgage out at that qualified for a mortgage at those low interest rates and had mortgage rates under 2%. And 2% doesn't exist right now. There's a feeling, there's a strong group of consensus that there will be a cut here in June. The economy is definitely weak. Employment numbers are weak. But still, there's many Canadians just on the edge. And to those people out there that say that there's nothing wrong with the economy, they definitely are either trying to be to mislead the public, or they're oblivious to what's going on in Canada.
Yeah, I mean, it's worth mentioning about Tiff Macklem there, that he was one of, while he was saying that, about like trying to instill confidence in home buyers and all the rest of it.
At the height.
He was one of those people.
At the height, right?
But he was one of those people that failed somehow. I still don't understand how, but he's one of those people that failed to see inflation around the corner, which obviously is what led to that massive increase in interest rates.
Their messaging was, there is no inflation, there is no inflation. It's transitory forever. And then it was blame it on a bunch of other factors. Don't blame it on the money printing. Andrew Scheer was on CTV and showed all the money printing. The money printing, and then you had the Liberal government, including Justin Trudeau, saying that he doesn't worry about the economy. And at that time, Mark Carney was the economic advisor to Chrystia Freeland and Justin Trudeau. And it's just abysmal. And the other thing you need to layer into all this is that these large groups are purchasers of single-family homes, and that includes the likes of BlackRock, Vanguard, and Brookfield Asset Management. So if there's massive defaults, guess who will be there to catch these defaults? Take a
Our
wild
friendly
guess.
neighborhood multinational corporation.
Yeah, take a wild guess. Just take a wild guess. Yeah, there you go. How Tiff Macklin still has his job after saying that and putting that many Canadians at risk. If we had a national media, that could follow his story, they should be on him and asking for his resignation because he's assured Canadians, and he's the top financial advisor in Canada. He provided that
But
advice.
also, his job is kind of glorified a lot, isn't it? As if it's like this really complex and magisterial position. But the reality of that job is that it's about inflation. It's about keeping inflation between 2% and 3% or whatever the target bracket
2%
exactly
is their target, yeah.
2% is like the sweet spot, isn't it? But I think they give themselves a little bit of wiggle room.
Yeah.
But that's his job, and obviously he completely failed at that because he didn't even see that inflation was going to. I still don't get that, because there were random people on Twitter and YouTube and stuff like that. There were just complete random people who were like, this is going to be a really serious patch of inflation.
There was a crazy guy on LinkedIn too. Oh, that was me.
But like the amount of people that said that,
Yeah.
and also, it's not like it was a really obscure theory, is it? They were printing enormous amounts of money. Just in fact, when you look at the graph, just an unbelievable peak in quantitative easing, as they call it in their sort of bollocks lingo that they have of money printing, and then all these checks being sent out just to individuals, like the SERB. And on top of that, you had other sort of just random checks. Businesses being subsidized.
Layer in the massive immigration, record immigration, like crazy record immigration, and the checks being handed out to them to buy furniture, to buy all this stuff. Like the amount of, and that drove, and one of the biggest components of inflation is the rent and mortgages, and it just drove rental demand crazy, and then layer in the last bit of layer, the compounding, escalating carbon tax.
Yeah. And then all of these regulations that were put in place for every single workplace, so everything became slower and more expensive, which then just became blamed on what did they call it? Supply chain problems or something. That was how they phrased it.
Again, if you're an accountant and you were just like you were in your third or fourth year, you could just lay out all the things that I just said and said, are those deflationary or inflationary? I mean, anybody that said they're deflationary should be like you should pick a different path.
Or alternatively, you should apply for the job of governor of the Bank of Canada, because apparently you're qualified.
Or for CERB or something else. Because anyway.
Remarkable.
This one here from Mark Nixon. Government lays off 10,000 workers, including 800 passport workers. So there you go.
And that's another thing. That was just purely political, wasn't it? I'm sure you can remember a few years ago when it was impossible to get a passport during COVID and just after COVID. And that became a political problem, didn't it? So they bunged in a lot of workers to fix it. And now it's back to normal. They're gone, I guess.
Well, all those people that were administering the carbon tax too, they talked about that earlier. It was in the Holly Dome Blacklock story. I'm not sure the status of them. What are they administering right now?
I'm sure they'll have some kind of tax they can work on.
There you go. And then Tim Hodgins, 72 hours into his first trip in Canada. One thing is clear, that there's a resolve to build. And this is the answer that's going to get answered here, or the question that's going to get answered here very soon. And it's a question that's, because there's a lot of talk about, an energy superpower and all that, and pipeline or no pipeline. At some point, the answer is going to be very clear from the Liberals that they do or do not support pipelines.
At the minute, they're trying to juggle, aren't they? They're trying to juggle on a unicycle.
Yeah.
But eventually, they're gonna have to make it clear, and that's because they're being political cowards. They would call themselves shrewd and wise owls, but really they're just being spineless. They're just being cowards, because it doesn't matter which one they choose. They're going to alienate very vocal minorities within Canada. But the reason I find this a little bit odd, and the reason I think it's particularly spineless, is because the polls, which they usually live by, these political people, because they don't actually speak to real human beings, they just rely on polls to tell them what the right thing to do is and what people think. The polls have suggested a pretty clear majority in favor of new pipelines and all kinds of natural resources development. So it's like they've got the ability to do it. But I suppose with the Liberal Party and with Canada, I'm sorry to say, in general, I think it all revolves around our wonderful friends in Quebec who are completely out of bounds, really. They're not within the normal Canadian bracket. They have their own priorities and their own politics. And I think the Liberals are really afraid to upset the Quebecois.
And Danielle Smith is really pushing for the Northern Gateway pipeline, so that would be David Eby. It's like all that stuff is going to come to head. This guy's qualified. I would say out of all the Liberals, this guy is probably the most qualified guy to actually. But with that said, though, he's going to have to stop all this double speak and actually come clean at some point, because Danielle Smith's not going to wait for 6 months, a year for them to kind of just continue to kick this around. I know he went to Calgary to do that speech, but the language still is not clear.
Yeah, well, I think he tried, didn't he? He tried to do everything that he possibly could without saying it absolutely explicitly and clearly. Like, he tried to make all the gestures, which to me suggests that was kind of his remit. It was like Carney has told him, go there, make them feel okay, give them a boost, but don't say anything that binds us. Don't say anything like, don't commit to anything or anything like that. We'll figure that out soon. And that, I think in that sense, he did a really good job, actually, in like reassuring people. And he said a lot of nice things that made a lot of people happy. But the fact remains that the ultimate decision, which has to be made by Mark Carney, hasn't been made yet.
In Mark Carney's words, let me be clear. The answer is obviously yes, possibly, for the most likely that the answer would be a yes, maybe, like for sure.
If Mark Carney was going to deliver that, it would be something like, with the necessary preconditions having been met in this circumlocutory fashion. It's just like, oh wow, 5 syllables, yes.
And then let me make 5 points. Anyway.
Point number 1. What he often does is point number 1, and then he just forgets the others, doesn't he? Yeah. Forgets to go back.
He just looks into the abyss and just says, is that enough for the reporters? Did they get enough out of that? Yeah, that's good enough. Yeah.
He likes to, something else I've noticed about him, he likes to snicker almost, doesn't he? He like goes, it's almost like he's sort of mocking the crowd in front of him.
We're going to do this story on and on just to kind of, like, this is one, we're going to add a few other. The Online News Act, Bill C-18, still has the media at the, well, as the picture shows, our friend ChatGPT made this picture. The local media is in the middle of this fight with the federal government and Meta, even though Meta is now collecting millions of dollars from this federal government who said it was going to boycott Meta and stand against the evil empire of Meta. And they don't stand very strong against it. So, and it's the local media outlets like ourselves that are hit the hardest. And the risk to communities for wildfires and all that. Even our local MP, elected Liberal MP, says this Bill C-18 has to come to an end. And yet here we are, still in it. And the reason I bring it up today, though, too, is TVA Group cuts 30 jobs as CEO, blames streamers and regulators. And that's the Quebecor media subsidiary, saying that the cuts mainly hit his television division. He also complained how stations like his are in direct competition with the government-funded CBC. How his cash the company received from the Canadian Media Fund has declined significantly. Look at that. And that's Pierre-Carl Palladot, the Chief Executive Officer of Quebecor. And that's it. The media outlets are fighting for the crumbs while CBC sticks its face in the trough and gorges itself. They got, in Mark Carney's platform, CBC got more funding, and immediately they gave themselves a raise, the executives. And Poilievre's platform, it was funding for local media and spending advertising dollars on local media, and the repeal of Bill C-18. Two different, distinct paths.
Very much. And the NDP didn't have a clue what they were doing, really. I can't even remember if the Greens mentioned it. I mean, I know you did an interview with the BC Greens leader, but that's not the same as the federal party. And the Bloc, I honestly couldn't tell you, but it would have certainly had something to do with Quebec. Quebec media somehow would have been privileged. But yeah, it's pretty bad. If you think as well that Mark Carney, there's all this fear, isn't there, about the censorship regime being installed, the Online Harms Act, which was abandoned in the last Parliament. There's a lot of fear that that's going to be kind of
even worse,
reintroduced.
Yeah.
And that's a little bit ironic, really, because his only discussion that I can recall about it during the campaign, Mark Carney's, was when he said something about, we have all these very bad people who are posting like racist and all sorts of horrible content on social media platforms. And I just found that a bit ironic at that point, really, for reasons we've previously mentioned, like that his party and his government given millions and millions of dollars to Facebook, which is the biggest social media network in the world, and presumably the one that he's talking about when he talks about misinformation and racism and whatever else. It's just, the thing is, even if you're not interested in what we're interested in, if you're not interested in Bill C-18, and I can understand that if you wouldn't be, it's sort of a little bit obscure and hard to understand for outsiders, maybe. But what is really important here, and what everybody should be interested in, is that the governing party, the Liberal Party, and the Prime Minister, who's now in charge, have behaved in a very obviously hypocritical fashion here. This is like a weak point for them. And if you're interested in scrutinizing power, as we all should be in a democracy, then this is a massive issue. Just on those terms, forget the details. Like a lot of scandals, the details don't really matter. Like the We Charity or something. Like, who really cares about the We Charity? The reason that was a scandal is because it made Justin Trudeau look bad, and that's why people were interested in it. That's why it was in the news. So I feel like on those terms, really, in that sort of context, this should be a much bigger story than it is, because it's a scandal. It's a failure, and it's an example of obvious hypocrisy.
The hypocrisy on this one is just blatant, and it's unjustified, and it's when we explain this story to most people, they just, I didn't even know that was happening. That's horrible. And yet it continues, and it doesn't make it into the light. The problem with it is bigger media outlets don't pick it up, because like the TVA, they're reliant on the crumbs. But most of them aren't even making it on the crumbs, because the crumbs keep cutting back. And the only one that gets to stick their face in the trough is CBC.
Mm-hmm. Well, and there's a number of other ones that get subsidies, but as Holly Dawn said, and many others have said, including Michael Geist, like, that's no way to survive. They're not gonna be strong and resilient, and they're not gonna thrive. And obviously, as you've mentioned a million times, they're not thriving, are they? Look at the state of their financials. They're in hell. Yeah. So they are being subsidized, but that one is a kind of like, that's bad for them too.
We do not have a free and independent media in Canada. We have a compromised media, and that is not a way to build a strong democracy. 100%. If you have our national media heavily reliant on who wins the election, that in itself has to be scary.
Indeed. And it's almost like now they just don't care anymore. It's almost like it's one of those things where everybody knows. It's kind of, when you go to certain countries in like Latin America or Asia, it's like corruption and criminality of a certain kind is just omnipresent. It's just there all the time. It's everywhere. And it's just kind of tolerated because the societies have kind of broken down to such an extent that they just can't, they just don't fight for it anymore. And they don't try to hold their leaders to account. The sad thing is that we risk almost downgrading, let's say, to that standard, because this is an obvious act of, we've said hypocrisy and all the rest of it, but it's also kind of, you could argue that there's corruption here too. Yeah. And that there are certain parties that benefit, such as the CBC, that are constantly accused of being biased towards the Liberal Party, they're never accused of being biased in favor of the Conservatives. It's always about the Liberals. And it's almost like they know that, we know that, and nothing happens. It's just kind of like, it's just this like open wound, isn't it, in Canadian society?
And it's odd that we had so many letters during the election to save the CBC, which was basically a form letter, was sent to us by, I don't know, like 50 plus people. But there's no interest in sending letters to save the democracy by having a free and independent media. Weird.
Indeed.
Conrad Black, in an op-ed there in the National Post, Canada covers itself in shame over Israel. There was that big march there in Canada,
about
here
Canada,
this weekend too.
The Liberal Party.
Yeah, there you go.
And the NDP. Sorry, let's not forget the NDP. The NDP are even more anti-Israel, considerably more anti-Israel than the Liberal Party.
There was that big march this past weekend as well.
Well, they also came out in front of like a food distribution centre in Ontario, didn't they? That was a bit of a sort of news story at the weekend. And they did that. There was a march, wasn't there? The March for Israel. That was a pro-Israel march.
That was a pretty big one.
That was kind of
50,
some Palestinian protesters. Pro-Palestinians were also there, weren't they?
Yeah, they were setting off smoke bombs and that. 56,000, I think, was the estimate of the march. Brian Lilly put, here's an old Ronald Reagan quote. Socialism only works in two places, heaven where they don't need it and hell where they already have it. And, you know, there's so many people that are trying to make it happen here in Canada, but they should go to different countries where it's been tried and failed and see the result of it before they scream for it here.
It worked, sort of. A modified version of it worked for a little bit in some Scandinavian countries, Sweden and sort of Denmark, maybe you could say. But you never, I'm sure if you've ever had discussions with anybody about this subject, you'll have heard that put forward as an example, like, oh, look, it's great in Sweden. But you don't really hear that so much anymore because Sweden is currently in the process of dismantling all that because it's for various reasons, and also has a really terrible gang crime problem right now, and problems with integrating a lot of the people that they've invited over the last sort of 20 years or so. Yeah. So, I mean, even Sweden, the golden example now, that almost that doesn't work. And then Denmark is now very, very tough on migration and all kinds of like,
well, they're sending people back
fraud
too.
And things like that. Yeah. So that's no longer an example either.
Yeah. And then Trump was interviewed just before he got on to his flight. But he takes interviews almost anywhere, and he took an interview there just as he was boarding Air Force One, and then he said that he thinks Vladimir Putin has gone completely crazy because Putin has ramped up his attacks onto the major cities, including Kiev there recently, with drones and rockets.
Yeah, I'd be interested to follow Trump supporters on this to see how they react, because they've been all about how like Russia's actually misunderstood and all the rest of it, and they've been quite sort of soft on Russia and soft on Putin. But now that Trump's come out and said this, are they going to be hard on Putin? I assume the answer is yes, because they do whatever their lord and master tells them to do, don't they?
The German defense minister says a draft could return if volunteer numbers fall short. And I was actually golfing with a guy this weekend who was in the military in a previous, part of his life. And he thinks the draft should come back to Canada. So that'll be very, very unpopular.
Certainly it'll be unpopular when the list of exemptions is published, and it includes the entire province of Quebec, all First Nations, maybe the LGBT community, like all the rest of it. I think at that point, people will be like, all right, well, I'm not going to do it either. Because that's the thing with Germany. Germany, like Sweden, has had a terrible tragedy with mass immigration and inability to assimilate certain populations. And to the extent now that there are mass stabbings in Germany almost every week, and it's not even news anymore. I mean, the story came through recently of one in Hamburg. I read the story briefly, but it was like, oh, okay. It's just like, dog bites man. It's not a news story anymore. So in societies like that, how do you organize a draft? If the people can't even live together in peace, how do you expect them to fight together? I don't see that happening.
The way to get people to join the military is put pride back in the military, and it is Memorial Day in the United States. So I do have a clip here. Donald Trump gave a speech at West Point Academy. J.D. Vance gave a speech in Annapolis here, and we'd have a small clip here to play.
Every cadet on the field before me should savor this morning, because this is a day that you will never, ever forget. You could have done anything you wanted. You could have gone anywhere. You could have gone to any school. This is one of the hardest schools to get into. Instead of sports teams and spreadsheets and software, you chose a life of service. The job of the U.S. Armed Forces is not to host drag shows, to transform foreign cultures, but to spread democracy to everybody around the world at the point of a gun. The military's job is to dominate any foe and annihilate any threat to America, anywhere, anytime. West Point cadets don't just have the brightest minds, you also have the bravest hearts and the noblest souls. You're amazing people. I could not be more proud to serve you as your commander-in-chief. Each of you continues down the same hallowed path walked by titans and legends of U.S. military lore. America's Army has never failed us, and with leaders like the West Point class of 2025, the Army will never fail.
There you go. I watched the speech Trump made at West Point, and I also watched the speech J.D. Vance made at Annapolis, because I watch a ton of news. And they are getting numbers they have not seen in a long time. They're over their recruitment goals now in the United States. There's definitely a lot of, there's a resurgence for the American military for sure. And stuff like that makes people want to join the military. And it is Memorial Day, so we do have another small clip to play because we do have to recognize that. And I think, you know, like Remembrance Day here, Memorial Day, we're going to play this small clip. There you go. It's Memorial Day in the United States. Obviously, anybody that puts on the uniform to fight for democracy deserves to be respected.
Yeah, but it's a bit poignant that you put those two videos together. You have Trump there saying what the American military is not for, including pushing democracy onto the people at the point of a gun, or however he phrased it. The saddest thing of all, really, is that, you know, a lot of those headstones there are people that had to go places like Iraq and Afghanistan in these just completely pointless, stupid wars that never should have been waged, and that the Americans had absolutely no business being there. Certainly no business dying there.
Yeah, you did make that.
In so many ways, we forget sometimes, but in so many ways, I feel like the Trump phenomenon is related to that. So Trump was always very, very, well, actually, let's say as a politician, not before, but as a politician, he was always very against, particularly Iraq, and said how stupid that was. And I think that was kind of central to, or at least important to, his rise.
And I think he made that speech in Qatar as well, saying the neocons and all those other people went on these wars to try to instill their version and build these nations, and, you know, to people that didn't want them. You have to go watch that whole speech to Iain's point there to understand that. And their mantra right now is peace through strength, and there's no denying it. I mean, you have to be a fool to not to believe that the American military is the strongest military force on this planet right now.
I mean, its only possible rival is China, and I don't think it's quite ready yet, is it, the Chinese army? But maybe one day.
Agreed.